Good evening, this is Justin Ford for From the Frontline. Tonight we are dealing with You Can Use Literature to Win Africa for Christ. In the studio with me is Dr. Peter Hammond, the founder of Frontline Fellowship, who has been involved in serving persecuted Christians for over 40 years in 38 countries. Last week's episode was the first part of a discussion about Christian books and Christian publishing in Africa. The discussion was sparked by Dr. Hammond's participation in a documentary being produced by Africa Speaks, a network of publishing professionals who aim to nurture the Christian publishing industry in Africa. You can find out more about them on the internet. africaspeaks.global is their website. In last week's episode, we covered the following topics: the importance of reading, especially for Christians, the history of Christian literature in South Africa, South African mainstream publishing versus South African Christian publishing, the influence of Christian literature in South African education, Christian books that shaped the South African mindset, books that influenced Dr. Hammond, and the most important books ever written, according to Dr. Hammond. Today we will pick up the discussion by asking Dr. Hammond, which books would he like to see on every school curriculum?
Well, as somebody who's got 4 children and 3 grandchildren, I've been deeply concerned about the content of a lot of curriculums, much of which is actually unedifying or forgettable nonsense. And I'm sorry to say that even many Christian curriculums, they don't have enough on Christian history from a Christian perspective. A lot of Christian history books that you get from Christian publishers today seem to be the same selection as the secular humanists of people, events, and topics, and even perspectives, although they add a few scripture verses here and there. And that's not Christian history. Christian history is looking at things from a uniquely biblical point of view. So I, for example, was inspired to write books like Sketches from South African History, which is now also translated into Afrikaans, to give a whole lot of stories of some of the very powerful Christian witnesses and influences in South African history, which includes everyone from Jan van Riebeeck to Paul Kruger and Andrew Murray, David Livingstone, through to Emily Hobhouse and General de Wet and James Barry Herzog, all the way through to Delaray. And there's so many inspiring characters in our history that we'd want to look at, like George Schmidt, the first missionary who opened the first missions organization, mission station in South Africa, to Canardendal from the Moravians, and very few people know these stories. And we should know about Andrew Murray, the greatest pastor, most blessed author in South Africa's history. And yet many people haven't even seen his books yet, and his books are read worldwide, but South Africa doesn't seem to know as much about Andrew Murray, to such an extent that a friend who was studying for the ministry at the Quirk School in Stellenbosch Theological Faculty asked the missiologist, Dr. Nico Smith. He was head of missions department at Stellenbosch Theological Seminary back in the 80s, and said, "Sir, why is it in 7 years we haven't discussed once any of Andrew Murray's writings, not even as key to the missionary problem?" Now, this is the missiology professor, and he hadn't even referred to one of the greatest missionaries in South Africa's history and pastors, Andrew Murray. Well, Nico Smith's response was quite disgusting. It was, Andrew Murray was no theologian. Now, bearing in mind, Andrew Murray had his doctorate before he turned 20, that he studied in Netherlands and Scotland, that he is a genius and the greatest author and most blessed pastor in South Africa's history, who launched the Africa Institute, who sent out hundreds of missionaries from South Africa, who wrote more on the deeper life and revival, prayer and Christian holiness than probably anyone else, and he's written as a great authority worldwide on this. To try to dismiss a man who is, without a shadow of a doubt, light years ahead of this missiologist, Nico Smith, who is disparaging him, absolutely scandalous, but explains why the Dutch Reformed Church has gone downhill from there. When you have people like that running your missiology departments, then there was another theological faculty dean at Stellenbosch who made a dumb statement back in 2009 that theology has nothing to do with God, theology is everything to do with man. Well, I think he's confusing anthropology for theology. Theology, theos, logos, theology is all about God, actually. So to have a dean of a theological seminary representing a denomination claim that theology has nothing to do with God is imbecilic. They're not even understanding the etymology of the word, theology. But so what's going wrong with our books and our curriculums, I think many of them are man-centered or commercially popular or what the New World Order would like us to have. So we need some distinctively Christian, Bible-based, Christ-centered, edifying, uplifting, Great Commission-oriented books. And that's what inspired me to put together things like Sketches from South African History and then Greater Century of Missions, which has got 19 biographies, 19 greatest missionaries of the 19th century missionary movement, and Greater Century of Reformation with 16 biographies of the 16 reformers of the 16th century and victorious Christians who changed the world. Now, these are small, bite-sized, well-illustrated biographies to introduce people to some great characters, like victorious Christians starts with Perpetua, carries on through to Mary Slessor. And you learn more about history by learning about the people, the stories, the events. And so I would like to see a lot more on our curriculum that focuses on stories in history, which is going to edify and challenge individuals. So Andrew Murray materials would be great, more of his books. And to see that people are learning about dedicated Christians to examples of excellence instead of some kind of mediocre socialist, humanist character that they're trying to push on their transgender LGBTQ. Or you've got some schools which are now literally telling kids to write a spell. What animal would you like to shapeshift into? And in reincarnation, what would you like to come back as? And then make a spell to put a curse on someone you don't like. And here's another English literature project in Transvaal, in Gauteng. They were requiring students to plan a bank robbery. We don't have enough bank robberies in South Africa. Amongst the instructions, choose your getaway vehicle, your weapons, and that sort of thing. And do we really want to encourage more of this? Don't we have enough? But that kind of nonsense, having Rowling's Harry Potter as a Setwick book. Now, why would you want to have witchcraft repackaged as Setwick books in English? But this is what's happening in many schools, so we've got to be sure that we've got thoroughly Christian textbooks and curriculums. Now, you can get some good resources. There are some great Christian publishers and curriculum providers out there. Becker and others like that in America, Christian Liberty Press. Theocentric Christian Education, Accelerate Christian Education in South Africa are doing a great job. So we need to go back to making sure that every book is God-honoring and Bible-based.
Yeah, last week you said something striking. You said that books are minds alive. So one would like to see Christian minds being exposed to the children.
Yes, there's no doubt that the philosophy of the classroom in this generation becomes the philosophy of government in the next generation.
What is the literacy level of Christians in South Africa and pastors, and how does that compare to the general public?
Well, I'd say right now it's pretty low compared to when I was converted. When I was converted in 1977, it seemed like every church had a bookshop or book table and a library, and pastors were regularly referring to books from the pulpit, recommending books. You even had sometimes book reports or book summaries in the church bulletin, and it was a lot more edifying that when a lot of Bible studies would be like that too, where people would be encouraged to study this book, whether it was The Calvary Road by Hessian or True Discipleship by MacDonald or something like that, A Celebration of Discipline. And these were very popular books when I was converted, and you could get together with a group of Christians and everyone seemed to have read The Cross and the Switchblade or Tortured for Christ, God Smuggler, and there was a whole lot of common books that people understood. Of course, Pilgrim's Progress, almost every Christian knew Pilgrim's Progress. Today, I think the literacy level is very low and very shallow, and I've met pastors who actually say, I haven't read a book since I left seminary, which is shocking. But you do have a low level of literacy as evidenced by the fact that it's a rare church now that's got a book table or a track stand even, and it's not common to have Christians going to the average bookshop. We used to have 650 independent Christian bookshops around South Africa. I don't even know if there's 100 now, and most of them aren't independent. Most would be part of chain stores, Lux Verbi or Kumbooks, as opposed to the independent bookshops of the past. So whereas we used to have a Christian bookshop in virtually every town, and some cases almost every suburb. Now that's rare. So literacy levels gone way down if bookshops have gone out of business.
So would you say that literacy levels are a barometer of the health of Christianity in a society?
I would say it is, yes. A reading Christian is a growing Christian. If you want to lead, you must read. And so it's like if you've got a lot of gymnasiums and sports teams, that indicates people are more physically healthy in that society. Well, people would be more spiritually healthy if you had more Christian bookshops and libraries, and a lot more evidence that churches are pushing good books through having a library or book tables. And you can also see that the level of literacy of the average pastor has gone down too. They're not quoting from as many books as they would have in the past. Now they're more likely to be quoting from a TV show or some website.
What is the general reading, well, I suppose we've touched on this slightly, what is the general reading culture in the country? How would you compare that with the evangelical community?
Well, I think most people have moved away from reading as much. We used to have a lot more newspapers, not that the newspapers were very high standard, but the internet is a lot less. So people are now, if they're reading at all, it's more like through screens rather than hard copy books, magazines, and it used to be going to the library was very common. When my children were growing up, I would take them to the library every week, and we would be getting lots of books. And what bothered me is the good books started to disappear, and you saw a lot of libraries having book sales. And they were selling off all the good old books to make space for the new politically correct garbage they had to get in. So many good books suddenly disappeared from the local library, which my children enjoyed getting. And now suddenly you've got books on Bicco and Karl Marx, and is that really what you want your kids to be reading? No. So the libraries got deteriorated too. In fact, I went to a Christian second-hand bookshop and was amazed at all the great things they had there. I said, where did you get all this from? This is Treasure House. And he said, you would weep to know. So tell me. He said, we heard that Cape Town Library was throwing out a lot of books and come with the biggest vehicle you've got. We went there with our bucket and we loaded off things from the dumpsters. They were throwing out hardback, good quality books. I mean, real treasures. And so they loaded up whatever they could salvage, and the rest went to the dumpster to be incinerated or pulped. And when I went up to Frontline-Episode up in Pretoria, they had a big Erfenis Heritage Library, magnificent library. I mean, leather-bound, first edition, sometimes only editions. Where do you get these? Dumpsters. We were told Pretoria Library was throwing out their books, and we went down with a bucky and we picked up all that we could salvage. And I mean, these were, many of them, absolutely irreplaceable, great books. But Pretoria Library, doubtless ordered by some politicos, threw out absolutely valuable, precious things. Now, it's not just South African libraries doing it. I've got books in our library here at Livingston House, which include, somebody sent me a first edition, Livingstone's Travels, Missionary Travels in Southern Africa by David Livingstone. And inside had University of Tennessee Library stamp, and another stamp over it, discarded. And in the top corner it had in pencil $2. Now, I did a check. A first edition of David Livingstone's Missionary Travels can sell on Amazon for $2,000. And here somebody tossed it out from a library and they sold it for $2. Now, that one person who got a gem, but it's depriving the people who used to use that whole library. The whole community is being deprived of this precious resource, a classic, one of the greatest books ever written, one of the most influential books in history. And they just threw it out. So you can see this is happening. This is all over the world. There's a war against good books. And then, of course, you get libraries burned. Like we've had these thugs, the Rhodes Must Fall crowd. They burned out the Library of University, Durban, Westville. And we had the City Hall in Bloemfontein burned out. Absolutely magnificent City Hall. And you've got libraries attached to many of these. We just had the fire in Parliament last year, and that included damage to some of the Library of Parliament. And right now there's a few thousand litres of water in the basement of Parliament because they never bothered to even put a canopy or anything over the burned-out roof. So when the rainy season came, tons of water came in and is now saturating the old Parliament building, which is worth billions of rands, and it's going to cost billions to repair, they say. But they couldn't even get a canvas canopy over the open roof. So when you've got people like that running the country, you can imagine how many libraries get destroyed. Now, universities are particularly being undermined. Some of the best books are going out. Remember, there was the burning of the library at University of Cape Town in that so-called wildfire, although the wildfire never came close to the actual campus itself, and it didn't even get through the tree line. Nevertheless, the library in the middle of the campus somehow burned out from the inside. The ivy on the outside of the wall was not touched. The gutters were not burned. The roof somehow, it got burned from the inside, not from the outside. And somehow some magic pine cone wafted through the air, through the closed windows, and burned up the library from the inside. If you want to believe that, I mean, that's pretty gullible, but that's the official version. And so a whole lot of irreplaceable things, including absolute first edition things in the University of Cape Town, burned up there. So there's a lot of cancel culture people out there destroying whole libraries. And that's a real threat to the future. So the reading culture in South Africa has been undermined. There's a war against libraries, a war against knowledge, a war against history. And I would say the evangelical community is in many ways shallow and superficial, not reading books. They're reading some memes, and they're not even reading good Christian magazines, let alone good old classic Christian books. So the reading culture has gone down a lot. And I know that because we used to, at Bible studies, discuss, people would be saying, reading in Hessians, the Calvary Road, and Matthew Henry said this, and Andrew Murray read that, and reading Watchman Nee, and you could just hear in an average Bible study fellowship, there was a lot of reading amongst the group that you'd chair, and you'd hear it from the sermons of pastors. But I mean, who today are quoting from, well, Martin Luther and John Calvin said this, and when I was studying what Charles Spurgeon was saying, you don't get that much today. So people are only repeating what they've heard from the mass media, whether it's social media or the televangelists, what's on TBN and so on. And that's pretty shallow.
On a more positive note, do you know of any ministry with a strong emphasis on helping to grow a reading culture among Christians in South Africa?
Well, when I was converted, Scripture Union was definitely the best. They were pushing Bible before breakfast and book tables, and it was quite common for a church to have a Scripture Union book table that they got from the Scripture Union bookshop here. And those were good evangelical Bible-based type of materials. I know in America there's the Chapel Library, which is superb, and they are getting a whole lot of classic books and reprinting them in inexpensive formats. A Banner of Truth Trust in America and Britain, Scotland. Banner of Truth gets some of the most classic old books and reprints them. And so Banner of Truth is always good. Sprinkle Publications in America also gets quite a lot of old classics and has them reprinted. That's been phenomenal blessing. We certainly need more here right now, but Christian publishing in South Africa is not as strong as it once was. That's why we actually started our Christian Liberty Books, that we could import and export and wholesale and retail good Christian books and classic things. So we've got a lot of old classics and Banner of Truth and other things here in Christian Liberty Books, about 6,000 titles if it counts audiovisual as well. So in South Africa, certainly Literature for Africa and Christian Liberty Books are trying to promote a good Christian reading culture. We need more ministries like that.
What are the unique features of the Christian publishing industry in South Africa compared with other nations in Africa, and what are some of the most popular authors in Southern African history?
Well, starting with the last first, some of those popular authors in South African history, well, the greatest in South African history is definitely Andrew Murray. The missionary to the Free State, he was the very first Dutch Reformed missionary to the Voortrekkers. He had his doctorate before he turned 20, so when he came back to the Cape, he was too young to be allowed to be a minister in the Cape. He had to be 22 to be a minister in the Cape colony. So they shipped him off to the Orange Free State because Orange Free State didn't have any Germanies at that stage. So he was a missionary to Voortrekkers for years. And when he came back and he was inducted into the Cape in 1860 on Pentecost Sunday at Wellington, revival broke out in the 1860 revival. And his writings on revival and deeper life, holiness and prayer since had become so popular. I think there's over 200 titles written by Andrew Murray in Dutch and English, translated in many languages. They've never been out of print. For over 120 years, Andrew Murray's writings have dominated the landscape. They're recognized worldwide as the best in terms of revival, deeper life, and holiness that you're going to get anywhere. So Andrew Murray's the most successful, read, published author in South Africa's history. Today, I would say probably the most popular author in South Africa at this moment is probably Angus Buchan because of his Mighty Men's Movements and his Faith Like Potatoes book, which was made into a very popular film. So, unfortunately, I'd say most of the popular authors in South Africa today would now be more like American, foreign, popular televangelist types. So you get a lot of Kenneth Hagin and Francine Rivers novels, or Tim LaHaye with the End Times Left Behind, Apollyon Assassin type of Christian fiction series. You've got everything from the Benny Hinn's to Kenneth Copeland. So a lot of name it, claim it, and frame it prosperity cult would be most popular in South Africa today. So South African authors aren't getting into our bookshops as much because the bookshops are actually owned by the publishers who are linked with the retailers, and they all seem to work in a bit of a circle, and they often have a relationship to the overseas company. So they will prefer an American name from a TV program over a local author. And you can have some very good local authors who will not be able to get a space on the shelf in these chain store controlled bookshops because they're controlled by conglomerates who are linked with publishing companies, which are linked with broadcasting companies. And if you're not part of that club, you don't get on the shelf. So there's a lot of great South African authors who should be on the shelves, but they're not. And many of them aren't very well known because of this unique feature of publishing in South Africa where it's basically monopolized, and it's a very difficult arena to get into unless you come from the right lineage, which means you're on their TV programs and you are part of their music or event publishers, and only then will you actually get space on the shelves.
Turning to discipleship material and Bible study material, what's the most popular used in Protestant churches here, and how do you think South African church pastors are investing enough in this?
There's definitely not enough investing in literature. Literature is the most cost-effective way of fulfilling the Great Commission, and it's far, far cheaper and far more effective than televangelism or anything like that. And yet some other people want to invest in television, even though it's been proven to be probably the least efficient, most expensive medium. Literature is an inexpensive and very effective medium, and you meet a lot of people who've been converted through books and Bibles, print media, but I've never met someone who's converted through television yet. Not saying it's not possible, but it's a lot rarer. So right now, the discipleship material, I'm not sure what's the most popular now, but when I was converted, it was Scripture Union's Daily Bread was super popular. And Daily Bread, Bible Before Breakfast, SU did great work in all the schools. Navigators is probably one of the best for America in terms of good devotional materials, Discovery Series. But we need more. In our mission, we found Old Testament Survey, New Testament Survey, Putting Feet to Your Faith are some of our most popular materials. At Literature of Africa stores, we've got some special Bible study packs which are like Discover the Word and Explore the Word are particularly popular from what we just read at Literature of Africa. And those get you prisons and hospitals and youth groups. So, yes, popular study materials. Historically, Bible commentaries like Matthew Henry's have been very popular. But right now, I'd say that there's a big opening for more discipleship material to be made available. We need to encourage more of our local pastors and evangelists to produce more.
Now, turning to magazines, which magazines have shaped the Christian mind of the average South African evangelical?
Well, when I was converted, it was In Magazine. In Magazine was published by Youth for Christ. In Magazine was, in fact, being sold in the foyers of almost every church. Churches were marketing these magazines as part of their outreach. and they had stands in virtually every church for In magazine, which was well organized. That went by the way after a while, and then in came Christian Living Today, and Christian Living Today made a big impact, and it was a very good magazine for a while, but then they got secularized, and something went wrong with the ownership and editorship, and they started to put secular pagans on the cover, like people like Brad Pitt and Nelson Mandela, and people who are not known as Christians at all. And at the time I said, this is insane. If you don't cater to your niche market, which is evangelical Christians, if you just want to look like any other secular magazine, there's how many secular magazines on the shelves, then you're going to get swamped by the competition. You can't out-secular the seculars. And it's like a Christian school or Christian university that tries to be as pagan universities. Why would you send your child to a Christian university that's indistinguishable from the local secular humanist university? They've got better sports facilities. So why would you go to the Christian university unless it was distinctively Christian? And so Christian Living Today basically ostracized their own support base, imploded their advertising base. Nobody wanted to advertise to them after a while. And most of their books magazines got sold, and they went from having a huge mailing list to a very small subscription base. But then Joy magazine came on the market. Joy magazine became super popular, and then Jeugd, the Afrikaans version of Joy magazine as well. So Joy and Jeugd are definitely the most popular Christian magazines now, and they are in most of the supermarkets, on most of the magazine shelves, and make a great impact, and they've had some very good series. So Joy and Yoke are without a doubt leading the market now. There are some others out there, Lifestyle and Devoted, but I don't think they can compare with the distribution of Joy and Yoke, because Joy and Yoke are getting distributed by a Republican news agency, which gets into most of the magazine racks in stores around the country.
Which are the most readily available and popular Christian books to most Christians?
Well, that's a question, because right now it would seem the most readily available would be the Name It, Claim It, Frame It, Prosperity Cult, Health and Wealth Gospel, televangelist types from America, the heretics basically. I mean, the Joyce Meyers and so on are super available, and end times, date-setting, fanaticism, rapture fever publications, very popular. Speak into Existence, Word of Faith movements, they might be the most popular and readily available, but they're not the healthiest or the most Bible-based or evangelically sound. So most readily available, sadly, are not necessarily the ones that you want. I think it's comparable to junk food in the shops versus healthy food. It's more readily available to get junk food, but that's not the best for your health. So you need to do a bit more digging to get organically grown food and healthy things that aren't pumped full of hormones. Well, it would be same in the publishing industry. Just because popular and readily available does not mean that that's the best choice for you.
Where do people generally go when they're looking to buy a Christian magazine?
Well, these days you can go into the average supermarket. I mean, whether you're talking about Pick and Pay or Checkers, you can literally get in an average secular shop some Christian magazines on the shelf. The local Spar, it's not difficult. Most of them are available. Well, I noticed that Woolworths, which is a popular shop, doesn't seem to have any Christian magazines on their magazine racks. And I think people should be complaining about that. Why not? Why is it so many Christians support the shop, and yet that shop seems to have an anti-Christian bias, that the management even publicly made a statement they won't stock Christian magazines, and they haven't. Even though they got a lot of protests at the time, they continue to not stock Christian magazines since. And I think they should be held to account and challenged about that.
How is the book distribution system built? How can a book or magazine be available in all provinces?
Well, in this country, we've got a system that's perhaps unhealthy. We've got stroke publishers and stroke Christian books, which are owned and controlled by Republican press, which control Republican news agency and most of the bookshops like the CNAs. So that's not particularly helpful when you've got such a monopoly across so many levels. So that has destroyed the independent bookshops and independent distribution, because you've got to be part of the Republican news agency for distribution to all the bookshops. And that's not available to most people. Most people are outside of that network. So it's not healthy. If you want a magazine to be available in all provinces of South Africa, probably the best thing you can do is drive to all the provinces, which is what we often do. We've gone around the country on our speaking tours, and so our materials are all over the place, but not because of any commercial network. It's just by hard work and ministering in different churches and schools and having public meetings in all the provinces. We need more independent bookshops. Unfortunately, chain stores are now the way of the future. And you can see, especially during the lockdown lunacy, you noticed how they didn't close down the big mega hyper stores and macros. They closed down the small little ones, and they let the biggest stay open. So big business and big government and big pharma and big tech work together to crush the middleman and the little guy. And sadly right now, I think independent Christian bookshops have gone bankrupt, mostly around the country, and now all you've got is these chain stores which are controlled by publishing groups which have their own agenda. Just take, for example, how you can, if you've got some gospel spiel, some gospel music event, they can fill a stadium, thousands of people to come to some so-called Christian music festival. But if you want to organize a prayer meeting or an outreach or a March for Life or something like that, you're going to be lucky to get a couple hundred there. And so it does show us superficiality that's come in the media in many churches, and sadly it trickles down to average Christian on the ground too.
Do mainstream bookshops cater to the Christian market, or do Christians have to go to specialist bookshops?
Well, because of the success of The Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's film, and so on, there have been more and more secular groups recognizing, the Christian market must be catered for. So you can go into a secular shop, whether you're talking about exclusive books, which is mostly pagan with lots of magical and Harry Potter and so on, but they'll have a religious section, and they'll have some Christian books. They'll even have some Bibles there, overpriced, mind you, but still. So the average shop, the average stationery shop, bookshop, and store will cater for Christians. They'll have a few token Christian magazines or a few token Christian books available, maybe even Bibles. But that does mean that we can go to exclusive books and say, I'd like you to please order for me, and you can give them. We've gotten quite a few of our books that we've published, even The Pink Agenda, which was actually banned by the government for exposing sexual revolution and the ruin of the family in South Africa, that we sold most of ours to exclusive bookshops. They were contacting us to get the books because the demand of their customers. So a person can go to exclusive books and say, I would like to have Great Century Missions, for example, and they will find us and they will order directly from us so that they can put on their shelf, getting a good discount from us too because they're booksellers. They get the trade discount. So interestingly, you can go to any bookshop that you tend to support and ask them to source a particular Christian book if you want, and they must do it, and they normally will want to, because they want you using the shop. They don't want you learning how to order direct.
Who are the top Christian authors in South Africa at the moment? Are they also key leaders?
Generally so. You'd probably find some mega church leader. He can produce a book which members of his church will feel obligated to buy and get because he's there, or it might be a lecturer at a university, and he can easily, just make your book a textbook, and the students have to buy it. And so that's how a lot of these things get done. Maybe the person's a popular pastor and he's going to be a conference speaker. So next thing, he can just have these books go to various conferences, and he's got a guaranteed marketing strategy and a certain amount of audience. So whether it's a popular lecturer or head of a denomination or leader of a mega church, they tend to be fairly much the bestsellers. But I think that sometimes it's a bit of a scam what they call a bestseller. It's been proven already. Some of these bestseller categories have been created by the authors or their agents buying up a large amount on the opening day in order to artificially create a sense of it's a bestseller. Then, of course, they resell them, but they've often artificially manipulated the statistic to make it look like they sold so much on opening day. It might have been that their agent actually did the buying of them all.
How is a bestseller defined in South Africa?
Well, yes, that's a good question. So we've asked them, and basically it happens that the bestseller is decided by a few selected stores. So somebody, say, at the Star or the Daily Mail in Gauteng contacts 5 exclusive bookshops around the country, maybe one in Cape Town, one in Durban, a couple in Pretoria and Joburg, and they find out what their bestsellers were. Now, that's exclusive books, which is a specific secular store, so it's not balanced. I've asked these bestseller people before, how is it possible that you never have a Christian book on a best-selling list? And yet we know that millions of James Dobson books have been sold, for example, millions. Bring Up Boys, Bring Up Girls, and Straight Talk to Men, and what are some of the other great James Dobson books about Love Must Be Tough and Dare to Discipline? I mean, these have sold millions of copies, but they never get in the bestseller list anywhere. So you ask, and these people say, well, we determine our bestseller list by what's sold in these selected bookshops, and we don't put Christian ones on because that wouldn't be fair. Why wouldn't it be fair? Because they always lead the market. So the best sellers would always be, for example, the bestseller would always be the Bible. So that's not fair because the rest of our books don't get a shine. So, well, why don't you say bestseller list exempting the Bible in an asterisk or something, with the exception of the Bible, which is always the bestseller. But they don't do that because that would give acknowledgement to the Bible. So when they made dumb comments like the shack is the Pilgrim's Progress of our time, and the shack is as trashy as the title suggests. Now, considering Pilgrim's Progress is the best-selling book of all time in English literature, how can you compare some stupid fad made? I mean, it was just a marketing strategy. Compare it with the best-selling book of all time. The shack didn't deserve to be mentioned in the same breath as Pilgrim's Progress. But anyway, you then had people saying that J.K. Rowling had now outsold the Bible and Harry Potter was more popular than the Bible. Not in its best year. The Bible has sold more than 3 billion copies in the last century. And who's going to beat that? But considering every year you've got tens of millions of Bibles being sold, it's just not possible to outsell the Bible. But you've got people trying to claim like the Spice Girls were more popular than the Beatles, and Harry Potter's more popular than the Bible, and there was some idiot who claimed he was more popular than Jesus. Was John Lennon one of these characters? And that's just so arrogant and self-deceiving. But yes, so I think a lot of bestseller lists are actually mutual back-scratching marketing scams, just like the Oscars. The Oscars are a group of billionaires in Hollywood swapping gold statues. This year I'll give you a best gold statue. Next year you give me a gold statue. And so it's the industry rewarding themselves and normally promoting the least worthy films, but they've got a political statement to make. And if it's pushing LGBTQ, transgenderism or something like that, then that's bound to get some gold statue, and they will promote it even if it's worthless. And people have noticed recently, why is it that recent Oscars are giving awards to films that nobody's heard of and nobody's seen? And that's the way it's moved. It used to be films that everyone saw and supported, like Ben-Hur and so on, Ten Commandments. And then it moved to something that made a political statement or was fashionable. And right now it's like a total marketing ploy. Hollywood wants you to see this particular sick piece of perversion that's promoting the latest fad they think is great. And therefore they'll give it an award to create people's interest, hoping that some people go out of curiosity to see this film. But people are onto this now, and so you're not even likely to do that. Now I know if it gets an Oscar, then it's the sort of film you want to avoid. And it's the exact opposite of what they're planning for. But that's where bestsellers have gone. So I think a lot of bestsellers are massaged, manipulated, and it's been found to be absolutely fraudulent.
Do you think digital culture has any pros, or does it only have cons? Has it had a seriously damaging effect on reading habits?
I think there's no doubt that reading hard copy books is better in many ways. And nevertheless, we're happy for the e-books and the digital marketplace too, because it is reaching people that's hard to reach otherwise. And digital libraries, we've invested in digital libraries to deliver into restricted access areas like the Muslim Middle East, where the Bible would be illegal, and to make it easier to smuggle Bibles. buy a little SD card, for example, into Red China, North Korea. I mean, there are some pros to digital culture, for sure. But if you make a choice between reading on a Kindle or reading a hard copy book, reading a hard copy book is better, and it's probably better for your eyes as well. But I think the reading habits, the problem is if a person's reading something, say, on their phone, the danger is, bing, something else, distraction. You've got endless distraction. Whereas if you just got a book, you've got less likelihood of problem. And similarly, you don't need to worry about Wi-Fi and power failure, load shedding, scheduled blackouts interfering with your reading. If you've got a candle, you can still read. But if your digital devices depends on the internet, well, power failure goes out, Eskom's just killed your plan of whatever you're doing. So the distractions that come on a digital device is huge. So I would say getting people into hard copy books is better than getting them into digital literacy. Just like if you've got to choose what's better, to hike a mountain or to do a virtual PT session on your computer. And it's obviously better to actually get out there and walk in the forest and climb a mountain than to watch a video of it or to do some virtual simulation. You're not going to get the same benefits out of an obstacle course on a video game as opposed to doing a real obstacle course, and so on. So, yes, I wouldn't rule out digital culture. It's got its place, especially with the persecuted church and ministering in areas where the Bible is illegal. But when we've got a choice, I'd always choose a hard copy.
For the digital junkies, are there any Christian websites or magazines that you would recommend on the internet?
Well, yes, there are a lot of good ones. And, for example, Joy has got Joy Digital. And I know there's other magazines only available digitally, like Devoted, which is a good new Christian magazine in South Africa. We have our Frontline Mission, sh.org web. We have a lot of our newsletters, both Christian Action, Frontline Fellowship News, available online that you can read online. I know Chapel Library has got a lot of great Christian classic books available online. Banner of Truth always has great books there. You can go on All Nations Gospel Publishers, and they have their Heart of Man books now available digitally. Heart of Man, many different languages. You can get the Bible now online in about 3,000 different languages, which is phenomenal. So there are some good sites you can go to. And if you just go on the Frontline Mission sh.org website, we've got a link to digital evangelism resource, which includes books, audiovisual, sermon audios, and so on. There's some very good audiovisual things available online, and we've got links on our website, including about 70 different tracks that we've produced, and a lot of PDF books that are free. They can download just through our website.
What can Christians do to promote a reading culture in their home, school, and congregation? Well,
the first thing is build bookshelves, have libraries. There's no such thing as too many books. It's just too few bookshelves. We need more bookshelves. And so putting in a bookshelf and library in your school, in your classroom, in your home, in your congregation, having a lending library, having a book table, that immediately promotes a reading culture. And recommending certain books in the pulpit, maybe even having someone do a book review. So I know, for example, Back to the Bible Mission will have a different student each day giving a different book review. So they'll come up and report, I read this book and this is what I got out of it, and summarize the book and hopefully whet people's appetite. And I think that's very helpful. There are Bible study groups where you might say, okay, each week if somebody could give a bit of a review on some book they're reading. You might even give a list of books and separate out amongst folks and say, okay, you're going to say review this book on Andrew Murray, With Christ in a School of Prayer. You'll do Abide with Christ, and you can go and look at the Calvary Road by Hessian. And so we divide up a whole lot of books amongst our group, and then they will imbibe it and give a summary to everyone else to benefit from. That's helpful. On some of my radio programs, actually take a book and summarize the book that I've just been studying. I've just been doing on Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, a series of Stephen Mitford Goodson's books. So he wrote on the history of central banking and enslavement of mankind, which I think is one of the most important books ever written. And to understand the banking scam and economics today, that book is the most helpful I've ever come across. And just recently I've been doing his book on Hendrik Verwoerd, the most popular, successful president in South Africa's history. He got us to a place where South Africa owed nothing. We were debt-free and we were having an 8% per annum growth rate. He electrified the country, got us energy independence, hydroelectric plants, and all sorts of great things, and increased literacy in the country dramatically, improved education, planted vast amounts of schools, black communities, raised the education level very highly. And so to know why was Henry Foot assassinated, what he achieved, very useful. I've taken some great books in history that have influenced me, like Pat Buchanan's The Unnecessary War, How Britain Lost the Empire and the West Lost the World, or Freedom Betrayed by President Herbert Hoover, and summarised the book and given it as presentations at the Reformation Society or on the Andrew Carrington Hitchcock radio program to try and encourage others to know more about the book. I think that's something we can do. Recommend books we know. If you're on social media promoting the books, encouraging it. When I went to the army, I actually took a book table there and I spread out books on my trunk or bed, and I would sell books while I was in the army. And during my 2 years, I sold over 650 books, which, when you bear in mind that a book in the 1970s, the average price of a paperback book was 50 cents, and the average price of a hardback book was R2. And the average price for a Bible was R2. So I managed to sell a lot of Bibles and books during my 2 years there, and it reached a lot of people. I think there's a lot you can do to promote good books. Operation Mobilization is probably the best worldwide. They've got these big floating bookshops, these ships, the Doulos, the Logos, Hope, and going from port to port, especially in the Middle East and Asian countries, and encouraging people to come onto this phenomenal selection of books. It's not only Christian books, a lot of educational books too, but they, through their Send the Light Trust, STL, they are marketing a lot of books, and many books they even made available as bookazines, which is printing books, a full book, in a magazine format with cheap paper, like newspaper type book wove, and it's easily, it's stapled, so it's not a properly bound book, but it's cheap and easy to distribute and inexpensive to buy, but it's still got the full content of that book. So Send the Light's become quite creative and innovative how to get good books in the hands of a lot of people. Our chapel library, of course, trying that and posting these reprints through the mail to people all over the world, especially in third world countries, trying to encourage them to read great classics of the past.
Oh, Dr. Hammond, we always close off with a list of resources. So where can Christians obtain good Christian books, and what other resources can you recommend?
Well, the bookshop we set up, Christian Liberty Books in Cape Town, has got a lot of books available online, www.christianlibertybooks.co.za. And these are books we've published, over 100 titles, books we've imported from all over the world, mostly home education books, Christian school textbooks, but also missions to the persecuted church, restricted access areas, Muslim evangelism, a lot of great reform teachings. So Christian Liberty Books is one source, and you can see a lot on the website too. Literature of Africa is our free ministry where we distribute tons, as in about 100 tons a year free, all over the world, of Bibles, New Testaments, Gospels, booklets, tracts, library books, libraries for pastors, textbooks for teachers. So Literature of Africa will distribute free to people who come to our stores. They can make an appointment, come through here and load up. And we've got people loading up their bicycle, their motorbike, their scooter, their boot of their car, their bakkie, or coming with a truck. Not just a 4 and 6 ton truck, but we've had people with 8 ton trucks. We've had people coming with a long flatbed, and we've prepared pallets and hired a pallet jack for the day, and not a pallet jack, a forklift. And then we've loaded sometimes 28 tons or 28 pallets onto a single vehicle to go up to Zambia. So Literature of Africa will supply you with tons of gospel literature free, literally tons. That's a great resource. Online, you will find All Nations Gospel Publishers. They're based in Pretoria. They've got The Heart of Man in many different languages, which is really great, including in poster format. All Nations Gospel Publishers, excellent. Chapel Library, based in Florida in America. They've got a lot of great Christian classics, both tracts and booklets. Navigators, based in Colorado. Carver in Harare. That's Christian Audiovisual Association. It's a ministry of Dutch Reformed Church based in Harare in Zimbabwe. Scripture Gift Mission is very helpful as well, gospel booklets. World Missionary Press gospel booklets provides vast amount of gospel booklets worldwide. We're their distributors in South Africa, but you can order from them wherever you are in the world. And they've got 5 kilogram boxes with 500 gospel booklets in each box, and each is 50 pages, all scripture, on a whole range of subjects. Very well worth obtaining. So World Missionary Press gospel booklets will provide you with huge amounts of spiritual ammunition to fulfill the Great Commission. Those are some great resources. If you go online to our livingstonfellowship.co.za website, you'll get lots of sermons, Bible studies, summaries of every book in the Bible, audio and hard copy, and tracts, about 70 different tracts, including in a variety of languages, that you can download absolutely free, livingstonfellowship.co.za website. We've been putting more and more things on our William Carey Bible Institute website, which is primarily set up to help persecute churches in restricted access countries. But you can benefit from it even if you're not in the Middle East. So William Carey Bible Institute, you'll find a whole range of subjects, everything from Old Testament, New Testament missions, Great Commission, through evangelism, apologetics, Muslim evangelism, a whole range of things, that biblical worldview that will help. So William Carey Bible Institute's got books, manuals, lecture notes, links, videos, audios, PowerPoints, a whole range of things that can help with some of the finest experts in the world that have donated their resources for us to make available.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. I think you've inspired all your listeners to increase their reading time and further promote a culture of reading to swim against the secular culture. I think this is summed up in Philippians 4, verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. Thank you very much for joining us from the front line. God bless and good night.